1.
Those Were the Days is filmed before a live internet audience.
Welcome to Those Were the Days. Tonight, we venture back across the pond as we wrap up a month of non-U.S. television series back in England. 221B Baker Street, to be precise, and we must always be precise. I will be your host on this adventure into mystery and intrigue, Travis, aka TVsTravis. But what host is complete without a merry cast of esteemed friends and colleagues? Joining me on this journey into the criminal world of Victorian London is the affable Audie.
I am a podcaster, but I can change if I have to, I guess. Wait, wrong episode. Oh, look. Newspaper. Maybe there's a good advertisement for something in here. Let's see. Oh, here's a weird one. Some guy knows a Greek got picked up and wasn't allowed to see where they took him. Huh. Oh, he knows Greek. Okay. So he had to translate from some guys that were roughing up some other guy? I feel like that might be code for something. He worked all night. Yep, code for something. And then they took him back, again without seeing where, and then dropped him off. Oof, literally. If anyone knows who these folks are, to contact this Mycroft Holmes? Weird. Look, safe words were established for a reason. Still, this Mycroft really wants to know who these guys are. Not my jam. Good luck with your kink, dude.
That did not go where I thought it was going.
Also with us is the resolute and steadfast Stephen.
Tally ho! What? Harumph, harumph. I'm British. Oi, oi, oi. That's all I got for you today.
And finally, someone with a keen eye for detail that rivals even the great detective himself. It's Amy.
One of my favorite things about Sherlock Holmes stories is that anytime he encounters a female character who is not a housekeeper or just like a house woman, the moral of the story always winds up being women.
That's right. If you couldn't tell by now, we are discussing the Granada television series of Sherlock Holmes, specifically from the first series of it called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. This ran from 1984 to 1985 in its initial run of 13 episodes. And before we dive too deep into it, I'm curious because I have watched these for many, many years. I want to know if any of you have any history with the character itself as well as this particular incarnation. I want to start with Stephen.
I like to fancy myself a fan of classic literature and mysteries as a kid who grew up on Hardy Boys. But I have to confess, despite having gotten Sherlock Holmes books from the library countless times, I've never completed one. And I've always wanted to, but I brought them home, started them, and went, well, all right then. It's kind of like when you're a kid and you just determine you're going to read Moby Dick, because white whales and stuff. But no, I know a lot about Sherlock Holmes in that I've seen his many incarnations. The one that actually hooked me is really kind of an analogy for Sherlock Holmes. That's House. Dr. House himself was a Holmes alike kind of show. That was the closest I ever got to watching this detective do his thing. I loved The Great Mouse Detective, also Sherlock Holmesy thing. But yeah, this is a long-winded way of me just trying to know what I'm talking about without knowing what I'm talking about. And I've never watched this show in my life, Travis, ever.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Audie, how about you?
Yeah, I never watched this. I was familiar with it only because I remember the commercials for it on PBS back in the day. I think like Steven, I've known about Sherlock Holmes. Like Sherlock Holmes is one of those characters that is just in the zeitgeist because at some point somebody read him and adapted his stories some way or somehow or watched this or this or that. Like I think Same way. What was the animated thing? You just mentioned it,
Great
Steven.
Mouse
Oh, the
Detective.
Great Mouse
Great
Detective.
Mouse Detective is
Basil of
probably my
Baker
first
Street.
real
Yeah.
introduction to a Sherlock Holmes story.
Mm.
And then just other things here and there. I got really hooked on the most recent BBC incarnation of Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch and
Yeah,
Martin
that
Freeman.
one's very
Um,
popular.
which watching this one, I heard the theme in their theme, and I was like, "Oh,
Yeah,
that was a nice little callback that I didn't realize they did in the more recent series." So, it was interesting to actually watch this for sure.
excellent. Amy, how about you?
Welcome to my TED Talk.
Yes.
No, I am huge in it, weirdly, having not seen this particular version. I'll start there.
Okay.
But I am hugely into Sherlock Holmes. Basil of Baker Street was number 2 in my heart, directly behind, of course, Robin Hood.
Oh man.
That
Growing up, absolute favorite. I have read essentially all of them. And then in my teens, I want to say, could have been early 20s, but it's probably my teens. I got really into this book series by an author called Laurie R. King. Um, and basically the premise is that Sherlock Holmes did not die at Reichenbach Falls and is instead in retirement out in the countryside, and he meets this young girl who is as, extraordinary as he is, and it's a whole thing. And I was in, a sort of online, fan group for the series. And for most of the people, maybe not most, but a large vocal group, Jeremy Brett is absolutely their favorite Sherlock Holmes.
Was
So that
that
was cool.
Laurie King series, The Beekeeper?
Yes, The Beekeeper's
Okay.
Apprentice.
Yep. Those are
Loved
really
those
good.
books. Loved those books. Um, So yeah, I do think though, at this point, I mean, I don't know if we're gonna talk about, but I do think that like the Guy Ritchie movies really renewed my love.
hmm,
And then Enola Holmes, if you haven't watched
Oh
Enola Holmes,
yeah.
Mhm.
highly
mhm,
recommend. Because then you get Henry Cavill's Sherlock Holmes, which I'm
yeah.
like, we could do that though, because
We
he's even
could do
allowed to drink
that.
water to do that one. Like that's
Right.
okay. Let's do that. Yeah. So I'm a huge fan
I'd
of all of
forgotten
it.
I
about
am.
Enola Holmes, man. And
Enola
sure, I
Holmes is
read
so
these
good. The
books.
Yeah.
books, yeah.
Sorry. I read these books called the Sherlock Holmes Junior Society or something in 7th grade. There was like 3
Yep.
of them, and I was like, "Where are more?" And there weren't more. So yeah, there was. I did associate with Sherlock a little in literary form.
There you go.
Yeah. So big Sherlock Holmes fan here. I've been reading them since I was a kid. I would get the books on tape when we would go on road trips. There was a particular one my library had that was read by Basil Rathbone,
Mm-hmm.
which was a great one when I was growing up. I've watched many different incarnations, iterations, read the novels. In my home, I went and grabbed this right before we started recording. In my home, if there was if a fire were to break out, there are two things and only two things that I would absolutely have to get out of the house. One of them is the truck downshifting on the highway behind me, the snoring dog.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
That's good.
and the other is this, which is the complete Sherlock Holmes collected works. And this was, let's see, the publishing date on this is 1938. This
Wow.
was given to me,
Dang.
and I love this. And this is the only other item that I would absolutely have to get out of the house if it were to burn. So I've been a fan of I mean, and the character himself, Sherlock Holmes, is, as Audie put, just part of the zeitgeist, hugely influential. There's been, I think, hundreds of adaptations on screen, not to mention on stage, not to
Hmm.
mention in audio play format.
I
I
believe
had,
it has Sherlock Holmes has the Guinness World Record for most portrayed in character
yeah,
in
I would
all
believe
of
that.
media.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Why? Like what makes Sherlock such a such
I
an
mean, if you think
imitable?
about it, like
So,
the
well, number
original
one,
stories were very pulpy, right? Like
Yeah,
that
yes.
was the whole
yeah,
Hmm.
thing. And you're
Hmm.
writing about this detective who's working. This is like the first story came out the year before Jack the Ripper really took off, which was
Yep.
famously an entire case that the police just utterly bumbled because they didn't care, because it was people that they didn't care about. And so the
Yep.
whole idea of this, that there's somebody that's looking out for you, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like no matter what, that there's somebody that you could go to in a situation. Like, seemed pretty good.
Yeah, because he's not in
He
for the
was
money.
he
He's
was
in it for the mystery. He's in it to find the
Yeah.
right,
answers. Yeah.
Yeah.
because he was the first consulting detective, which
Yeah.
is a wonder. I love that title. I love the
So
title
good.
of consulting detective. Another reason why it's been adapted so many times is it became public domain fairly
Yeah.
early on,
Oh, yeah.
and so
Yeah.
it was free. You could just do it, which
Sweet.
helps. But I mean, just hundreds of incarnations of him, and I loved Basil Rathbone. He was, the 1940s. He was doing the movies, and he was great. I have an audio collection that has Sir John Gielgud as Sherlock Holmes, also fantastic.
Have you seen
Um,
the Sir Ian McKellen Mr. Holmes
Oh,
movie from
yeah.
2015? I haven't seen it, but I
I haven't
want
either,
to.
and I want to.
Mm-hmm.
I want to a
Mm.
lot.
Yeah.
When that came out, it reminded me a lot of The Beekeeper's Apprentice. It made
Yeah.
me think of that book.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it. I want to. I just never
See,
got
now I
around
just
to it,
want
which is dumb.
now I want Sir Ian and Patrick Stewart to just be old
Oh yeah.
Holmes and
Oh,
Watson just
Oh, my
chilling.
gosh,
be
please.
fantastic.
How
It would
much?
be
Me
so
too.
Just
good.
take my money. Like, this is
I
great.
Yeah.
know.
But of all the versions of it, like I like young Sherlock Holmes. I enjoy that movie. I thought that was a lot of fun. You mentioned Great Mouse Detective. It's great. There's all sorts. Not only are there a ton of Sherlock Holmes, but then the adaptations of it, the
Yeah.
spin-offs, um, and the different reworkings of that. House is a great one.
Mm-hmm.
But throughout all of them, this version that we watched for this week, the Granada television series, is the Sherlock Holmes for me, like above all the other ones. When I think of Sherlock Holmes, I see Jeremy Brett and I hear his voice.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting is that he grew up with rhoticism, and he couldn't pronounce the letter R, and he had to have corrective surgery for it, and then train himself. But if you watch this episode and you watch him as Sherlock, especially, he's got incredible diction and he's very sharp and precise with everything.
Mhm.
And you think about him as a young man not being able to pronounce the letter R. It just kind of baffles me a little bit.
Today I
Um,
learned the word rhoticism for people who cannot pronounce the letter R is just
Yeah.
dang cruelty. It's like lisp. It's just not
Yeah.
Yeah.
nice. Some a-hole invented these words for these people, and I hate him.
Mhm.
So the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, or if you find it, I think it's streaming on BritBox as just Sherlock Holmes. It's also, I did find today that somebody has them all up on YouTube. So there's a
Nice.
playlist of all of
There you
them
go.
on YouTube. So it started in 1984. It ran until 1994. Not consistently, like it ran for a couple of years and they took some time off. So they did 13 episodes of The Adventures. And then a couple years later, they made a feature length of The Sign of Four. They made 4 feature length episodes and 5 feature lengths, sorry, and then 4 series: The Adventures, The Return, The Casebook, and The Memoirs. The last 2 being a little bit shorter. The first 2 were 13 episodes. The last 2 were 9 and 6. So it was a total of 41 episodes and 5 movies that they made over the course of 10 years. All of them starring Jeremy Brett. We watched an episode early on that had David Burke playing Dr. John Watson. He initially did it for the first 13 episodes and then decided he wanted to spend more time at home with his young son. And so he left and they brought in another gentleman by the name of Edward Hardwick to play Dr. Watson throughout the rest of it. And it played here on PBS, and also I remember seeing it on, and I may have even found it via A&E of all
Mm.
networks.
Oh yeah.
It played on there for a little while too. But one of the things they were doing when they made this particular series was they wanted to stay very close to the original source. So
Mhm.
they made it a period piece. They really, John Hawksworth was kind of the director of a lot of it, and one of the showrunners, and he Michael Cox created it, and they wanted to stick real close to things. They did make some changes, which I will talk about a couple of changes they made in this particular story. But Jeremy Brett, who was kind of reluctant, this I found interesting. He was almost James Bond. He was considered for James Bond after Sean Connery. Because at the time he was a stage actor. He'd been doing like Hamlet, and also, I mean, he did a lot. His stage career is pretty impressive. But he ended up losing out to Roger Moore, and in a way, it's kind of good, I think, because we wouldn't have probably gotten him as Sherlock Holmes if he'd played James Bond. He would have been working on that at the time, and that would have been a crime against humanity because he's so good. He is the polar opposite of Sherlock Holmes. The character of Holmes he embodies so well is not who Jeremy Brett was. Jeremy Brett was very gregarious, very outgoing, very, very friendly, just this lovely person. And he's talked about how difficult it could be at times to play Sherlock because he's so cordoned off from everybody. He's so isolated, and he's very dark. And it actually messed with him some. He ended up getting diagnosed manic depressive after the initial run of the series, and he got prescribed lithium, and he was reluctant to do it at first because he didn't want to get typecast, but he ended up basically from like 1984 on, it was his entire career was just being Sherlock Holmes. But it did cause him some health issues. He got in the hospital a few times for stress-related health issues, and he would have trouble with it. But he put so much of himself into the character.
He should have just Sherlock Holmes did and used cocaine.
I mean, he could have.
Right there.
I mean, just method.
Yeah.
But he sadly passed away in 1995 at the age of 61 of heart failure. And he also, he didn't do cocaine. He smoked a lot. Edward Hardwicke said at one point he was smoking like 60 cigarettes a day.
I
like
mean,
3 packs.
It was a time.
Yeah. I mean, it's good for
fair.
you. If 20 of them are good, 60's better.
Right?
9 out of 10 doctors agree that they did receive.
Hey, what happened to your uvula there, Ted? You got a hole in the middle of it. You whistle when you speak. Sound like you swallowed a squeaky toy.
When he signed on to do this series, he just dove into it, and he would read it constantly, and he would just obsess over details, and he really created such a character, and he really obsessed over mannerisms and speech patterns, and what he brought to it, and what I love about it is there's an energy to Sherlock Holmes that he has at all times, whether he's speaking or not, that I absolutely adore. If you do end up watching any more of these episodes, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, he's just so good at it in both the loud, boisterous moments and those quiet moments, those moments where he's just contemplating with a pipe and thinking out a problem. I thought he's just amazing. I can't say enough good things about him. And by all accounts, he was a pretty lovely person. In every interview I've seen with him, he's just fascinating to listen to. And he and Edward Hardwicke had a really good, because he got along really well with David Burke, and they did the series. And then when Burke left and they brought in Edward Hardwicke later, he's like, he even said, I was a little worried at first because you have a good rapport going in Holmes and Watson. It's like, you're going to change that up, but they immediately hit it off, and they ended up doing not only the series and the movies, but they did a year or two run on the stage as Holmes and Watson.
Oh, wow.
Together as well, which was pretty cool. Also, real quick, this was a fun bit of trivia. Jeremy Brett played Dr. Watson on stage, I think, a couple of years before he got cast as Sherlock Holmes. He was Dr. Watson something. So he's one of the few actors to have played both professionally.
Nice.
Great.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty cool. We watched an episode called The Greek Interpreter. And I'm going to guess that Stephen and Audie, you haven't read that one before.
I haven't. I didn't even know it was a story. I know like Hounds of the Baskervilles and that Hounds of the yeah, I got it.
Yeah. Amy, were you familiar with The Greek Interpreter?
I'm
story?
sure I read it at some point. but I didn't remember it
Sure.
really
Okay.
at all.
The main reason I chose this episode for us to watch, because it's not my favorite of the series, but it did introduce Mycroft. And Mycroft is awesome. I love him as a character, and he's great. Charles Gray plays him in this episode, and Charles Gray as this kind of almost just crazy old man he's perfect. He's so
I was
good
like,
as
hang
Mycroft.
on.
Yeah. Quite an
Hang
age
on.
discrepancy there. Like, oh, this is my decades older than me, brother. Or at
To
least
be
it
fair, I
seemed that
do
way.
have a nearly 2 decades older than me brother.
I mean, I'm
so,
not saying it doesn't
you know.
happen. It was just striking when he came
Yep.
I
out with
do
his
still
big gray
think
mutton
he was
chops.
great. He was great. I do still think that Stephen Fry is my favorite Mycroft Holmes.
I mean,
Stephen Fry's my
Really
favorite
good.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do like the BBC Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman.
Mhm.
I do enjoy that series, and Mark Gatiss as Mycroft in that is also quite good because he's a very different Mycroft. He's borderline antagonistic. Like they really leaned into that part of like the sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
Whereas here, Charles Gray and Jeremy Brett, like their Sherlock and Mycroft don't butt heads quite so much.
Right.
Yeah.
But I also love the introduction of him in this episode because the episode opens up with just a kind of a cold open of it's like the dock and some guy coming out and he's looking confused, starts looking at some papers when someone walks up to him and starts talking to him, and he just responds back in Greek. And the guy's like, "Well, I don't know what you're saying, but yes, I'm Mr. Latimer. Come with me." And takes the guy, and when they get him around the corner, they just whack him in the back of the head, throw him in a carriage, and take off. And then opening credits. Like it's kind of there was a lot of that in the cold opens for these.
Well, if I've learned anything too from movies, it's if there's cobblestone fog and you're in London, don't follow strangers anywhere. It's
No,
pretty much
never ends well.
guaranteed. Yeah, it's not going to be a good time.
Yeah, we get a narration from Dr. Watson, which is in the style of the stories. Everything was told from Watson's point of view as he's recollecting these cases. And David Burke was great as Dr. Watson because he has this look on his face of like something with his smile always got me, where he's like he doesn't quite believe what Holmes is telling him at any point.
Yeah,
And I
right?
just
Like
love
you can
that.
be like, you're like, ah, yeah, that person is an accountant and they've been in the war, and you're like, okay,
Yeah. Right. Sure.
It's a
sure
good,
thing,
whatever you say.
pal.
healthy skepticism. from
Okay,
Watson.
Grandpa, let's.
Yeah, this is get you to bed.
Mhm.
And I love the framing of this particular story where we're learning for the first time that Holmes has family. He has a brother.
Yeah.
And it's the first mention of the Diogenes Club, which I like there's only two stipulations for entry, shyness and misanthropy.
Mhm.
I do like that.
Very
I
good.
don't think I've ever heard it pronounced anywhere else before.
What, Diogenes?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. There you go.
I mean,
That's all.
it's the first time and only time I've ever heard it pronounced was in this series.
That's what I'm saying.
But they go to meet Mycroft because he's got an issue and wants Sherlock to find out about it. And I do like the introduction of him off camera of like, yeah, he's even a better detective than I am. And Watson's like, oh, come on, really? Whatever.
Mhm.
And it's great because you learn, if this was your first episode watching, you learn so much about Sherlock right away from that moment where, you know, his whole thing of like counting modesty amongst the virtues and like, you know, detracting from your own abilities is just as bad as overinflating them. Like it just is. What I've told you is 100% the truth. And you do
I
learn
like
like
that, yeah.
Mycroft is as good a detective as or he's as good at observing as
Yeah.
Sherlock. He
Mhm.
just
He
doesn't
has
care.
the same brain power. That's my
Yeah.
favorite thing about Mycroft is Mycroft is like absolutely brilliant and lazy as hell. And so he just gets a government job moving money. And
Yep.
that is so good.
That's my spirit animal. Mycroft is
It's
just like,
so good.
just think about all the things you could accomplish. Yeah, but that sounds like a lot of hard work.
It's like
I
a lot of
mean,
work. I can just move numbers around for the government.
yeah, I can be real good at crossword puzzles, but
love
do
that.
other stuff. That'd be great.
Sit in my club, not
Yep.
speak to people.
Which the Diogenes Club is great. Like that scene where Watson walks through it and just everybody in there is sitting in utter silence reading newspapers.
Hmm.
That's
the
the
most
club.
unclubbable men in London.
I would love to be a part
And
of
then
that club. That sounds great.
Right.
I think my favorite part though is that later on we get the shot of that butler walking down the hallway with like a drink on a tray.
Yeah.
And they focus on his feet and he's got socks
Mhm.
over his shoes to
Yeah.
deaden the sound. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
That was impressive.
Love it. Because
Um,
like Watson and Holmes walking down that hall, it is very notably click, click, click down that
Mhm.
hall.
Yep. Yes. Yes, because this is Victorian London, and boy, those were hard leather soles.
Mm.
Yeah,
They
they
didn't
were
have no
playing around.
rubber
They
tennis shoes
gotta.
there. Yeah. So Mycroft has a man that lives by him by the name of Melas, who is a Greek interpreter, and he needs help because something weird happened to him the night before. He was roused from his apartment late, which they say late. It was like 7 o'clock.
It was
But-
like 7 o'clock. I mean, that said, yeah.
Back
If
at
somebody
me-
comes to get
Also-
me at 7 o'clock, I'm going,
Right.
Yeah.
it's so late.
And when when
It's
you're
also-
talking about
it's-
gas lamps, I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're
that's
trying to
true.
go to bed. It's the sun is
Mhm.
down.
Yeah.
But we get the story told to us via flashbacks of Melas was taken. He was put into a carriage with with shades all over the windows and driven for 2 hours before he got to a house where he was told to be an interpreter for a Greek person. Neither of the two men spoke Greek, but he was not allowed to do anything but speak the questions and then translate the answers. And that was
So-
It could
it.
only be written.
My
Yes.
favorite part about him telling the story is that, he's like, I couldn't see anything. And Holmes is like, well, didn't you listen? And he's like, yeah, I did. And I was like, you like planned. Like, because you live, I feel like because you know Mycroft Holmes, you were prepared for this very question.
Yep.
These are the conversations you have with a Holmes. You're like, no, I
Yes.
did listen. Here's what I know.
I loved that. So the story goes that there's a man there that they wouldn't let speak. They had him like gagged, and he could only write. But they were asking him questions, and he eventually figured out that these two guys don't know any Greek, so I'm just going to slip in some stuff and see if they notice, and try to get more information. But before he could get more information, a woman came into the room. Things ensued, and then the guys were like, "All right, well, we're done," and kicked him out. And they drove him another 2 hours back, and then just literally dumped him out of
Dumped
the
him.
carriage.
Hmm.
So, with the threat of bodily harm if he talked to anyone, they did give him 5 sovereigns, though, which pretty good amount of money
It's
for.
pretty good.
Dude, can we talk
So,
about the
I-
villain guy for just a second? Because
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
villain guy, I can't remember his name. You have to forgive me. What was it? I got the IMDb right here. George or Wilson Kemp. Was that the
Yes.
guy? That was the main bad dude.
Yep.
Hmm.
I was completely enthralled by this guy's performance. Like everything about him, his mutton chops, his big old glasses that magnified his eyes, the way he spoke. I was sitting there, I was like drawn in. I'm like, what is he saying? What's that guy? Like leaning into the camera. Oh my gosh. It was like ASMR for me though, a little bit. It was like I'm gonna fall asleep. I don't know if it's rhythm or the gentle way he was speaking. He reminded me a lot of Tote from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like
It's exactly
So-
it. I was like, I've seen this man as a Nazi somewhere.
Yes.
I'm
Here's the funny
telling
thing.
you.
Yeah.
Here's the really funny thing is he didn't play Tote in
Right.
Raiders of the
No.
Lost Ark, but the actor that did was in this series.
Are you
one
serious?
point.
Amazing.
What?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they used him in the series. He played twins in an episode. One of the, I think it was in The Sign of Four, the first feature length one. Because I remember seeing that like that's when I was younger. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's the Nazi guy from freaking Indiana Jones.
With the
But,
clothes hanger. That's the
Yeah.
guy.
there was also an episode of this that had a young Marina Sirtis.
No way.
Ooh.
All right.
Yeah. So Watson or Holmes takes the case. I do like when they come back from the story, and then it's just like Mr. Molas is sitting there waiting, and here's Sherlock, Watson, and Mycroft sitting just thinking.
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
two of them are thinking. Mycroft is asleep,
Right.
and which is wonderful. He just nods off. Sherlock takes the case. It's like we're gonna figure this out. Mycroft had put an ad in the papers.
Which, okay,
Mhm.
Mycroft, my man. Is this a smart move? This man has told you
No.
that if he tells anyone, they're going to kill him. And you're like, let me just put this in the paper. Hang on. I mean, I know
no.
it's a very Holmesian thing to do. Like that and the irregulars were like the way that you got stuff done. You
Mhm.
just put an ad in the paper and stuff happened. But like, come on, my man.
It's like he's
I
like
also
the
Not
wonder-
dude.
great.
He's like the dude calling Walt, and Walt's like, whatever. She kidnapped
Uh-huh.
herself. We'll throw the ringer. You know,
Yeah, it's just
like that's
boring.
that's what
Yeah.
this is.
But I also
Yeah.
wondered if
much.
Mycroft being a Holmes was like didn't bother to tell Mr. Molas this until just this moment when he's telling his brother. Like,
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. By the
I
way,
have a
did-
feeling that definitely happened. Like Mycroft didn't run this by the guy first. He just
Oh,
he just
no.
did it.
No. Yeah.
So Sherlock takes the case and is like, we're gonna figure this out. Go home. And tells Molas to leave, who, as he's leaving, who's a member of the Diogenes Club, because again, shyness and misanthropy, Mr. Latimer, one of our villains, who sees him leaving. So Holmes and Watson head back to 221B, and on their way they stop. They make one stop. They get there and they see movement behind the door, and they open it up, and who's there? It's Mycroft, just already back there, like waiting for him, which is great. How did you get here? And he's like, I passed you when you stopped. So
Well,
Mycroft
also,
got
just before this, like on the way back,
Mhm.
Holmes just laying out everything they actually know because of this conversation from Mr. Molas, and Watson's like,
Yep.
okay, yeah, okay, all right.
Sure.
I'm glad we know this now.
Yep. Oh yes. But Mycroft is there because he got an answer to his ad. Somebody wrote him saying, "Hey, we know this woman. We can tell her story." But Sherlock is like, "Well, yeah, except the brother is the more important one because he's being starved to death and beaten, and we need to go find him." So they're going to take off. They're going to go. They're going to get Mr. Molas. They're going to go to Scotland Yard, and then they're going to go and get the guys.
Mm-hmm.
But before they can get to Mr. Molas, Kemp shows up and takes him. So then they're like, okay, well, I guess we'll just go to Scotland Yard. So they go to Scotland Yard, who won't do anything without a warrant.
To be fair.
They need it signed by a magistrate, which you
It's
can't just
so-
call.
You can't just call.
Mm-mm.
There's no phone to just call the magistrate. So they're waiting and waiting and waiting. Meanwhile, Mr. Molas is once again doing the interpreting thing. And the man, Paul Catrides, is looking rough. He's
Mhm.
definitely hasn't eaten in a while. The threats are getting worse and worse. They finally break him by threatening to kill his sister. That's who the woman was. And so he signs whatever paperwork they wanted. And meanwhile, Holmes and Watson are on their way there with the police. They get there too late, though.
Mhm.
They get there and they find the place empty. But in a room, they've locked or they've shut in Catrides and Molas with sulfur. They just burned sulfur in the room and left him in there, which sadly killed Catrides. He was dead.
not. He was hanging on
Yeah.
Yeah,
by a
Mhm.
thread anyway.
it was the coup de grace, as it
Well,
were.
I also love like just before getting in the house, they're stepping out of the carriage, and Holmes is like, "Hey, these tracks looks like they were made by a carriage loaded up." Just
Yeah.
immediately, like,
Yeah.
Heavy
"Oh, yeah,
carriage
by the way,
loaded with
I
luggage.
noticed
Within
this."
the last
Left
half
here.
hour.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Which how he figured out the
Um,
time, I don't know. I mean, I guess the wind blowing
Sherlock
from a
Holmes.
direction may have put dirt on
Yeah.
over time. Dude's slick. He knows what's up.
Yeah.
But they do find Molas still alive, and I love because it's classic doctoring. The first thing Watson says is, "Get brandy."
Yes.
Yep.
That's his go-to for everything is get somebody some brandy because Dr. Watson was a medical doctor
Mhm.
in the army.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was a field doctor. So
Yeah.
that's what you've got.
You use
Yep.
what you
Those are-
have available.
that and a bone saw. Those are
Yeah.
your two
Yeah,
options.
pretty much.
Oh, I'm
They
glad
do
we were
figure
bored
out-
now.
Yeah.
Yes. So they figure out that the men left with Sophie, Catridi's sister, and that they find a book. They figured out that they were taking the boat train from London to Dover, and it only makes one stop
stop.
between those two in precisely 23 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
as Mycroft tells them. So the three of them take off, and they book it for the train station. They just get to the train as it's
so
leaving the
good.
station.
Mycroft getting on the train as it's
Mycroft
pulling out of the
Mhm.
station. It's
running
so
for the
good.
train,
I'm
as I
not
use air
built for
quotes.
running.
But they get on the train, and then I do love the scene with the ticket taker
Yes.
because Sherlock's reputation precedes him a lot because of the
Mhm.
stories that Watson has been writing and they've been getting published.
Because that's
And,
the whole conceit, right? Is that Arthur Conan Doyle is like, I was handed these.
Mhm.
Like
Right.
it is all put out under the guise of Dr. Watson wrote these. I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm just a vehicle.
Yep. But the ticket taker knew who Sherlock was and is all eager to help him. And there are two possibilities of cabins where the two men and the woman could be. So Sherlock and Watson decide to go check it out, and they leave Mycroft sleeping in the cabin because he's fallen
Yeah.
asleep again.
But he does.
Or has he?
Mm-hmm.
So they go, they find Latimer and Sophie in their cabin. Kemp nowhere to be found. I do like, again, it's another great kind of confrontation scene because at first Latimer's like, "Who are you?" And he doesn't say his name. He doesn't give away who they are. He just launches right into Sherlock mode, telling
Yeah.
him like all this stuff. And then when Latimer says, "Well, I'll just call the guard," he's like, "Please do, please do. My associate, Dr. Watson here, would be happy to speak to him." And that's
Mhm.
like, I'm not going to give you my name, but I'll give you his name. And that's when
no.
Latimer's like, "Oh dear, I've made a mistake."
No.
He tries a daring-ish sort of grab Sophia thing, but she
Yeah.
wriggles away from him as the emergency door on their cabin opens up and he's hanging out the side of the train.
Yeah. That was like an
And then-
interesting choice.
Mhm.
And then falls to his death. Meanwhile, while all that's going on, we see Kemp is just sitting eating. And then the second time we see him, he's got a companion, and it's Mycroft
Yeah, he
sitting
does.
at the table with him. And when he gets up to leave, Mycroft gets up to, because he's a gentleman, right? He's going to get up from the
Mhm.
table. The train jostles a little bit and they bump into each other. And then Kemp leaves. And when he gets back, he finds Sherlock there with Sophie. And when he goes to pull his little derringer that he's got,
So
Mycroft
good.
just shows up. "I believe this is your," and he calls it a revolver,
he
but
does.
he picked his pocket. And it's
Mhm.
great because if you know the stories at all, like exactly what happened in that moment immediately, but you
Yeah.
could easily play it off as just Mycroft is a little bumbling.
Because he even says like, "Oh, I forget my size."
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, I
Even though
knew.
I knew something was up.
I knew something.
Yeah.
People don't bump into each other in a show without somebody taking something. Like it's,
Oh yeah.
Right.
I did some meta thinking, but I definitely knew he picked something out of his pockets.
And then we cut to the police have captured him at the Dover station. They're taking Kemp away. They're taking Sophia away. She
We've
did
missed
admit.
the entire we missed
We-
the entire part of her talking, like the back and forth, where they're like, she's like, "No, we're gonna get married on the continent," and it's like, "He killed your brother." No, he's gonna meet it, and the guy's like, "Don't even
Right.
worry about it, sweetheart. Don't this." Yeah, this is the whole that you don't believe them, do you? And they're like, "No, he's
Yeah.
dead." And so that's
Mhm.
like, because we have to get to women. We haven't gotten.
That is the thing with Sherlock
Mhm.
is he does not trust women, save for one kind
well,
of.
which is also the reason that he doesn't trust women.
Right.
I mean,
He trusts
and honestly,
he trusts
you can kind of.
um Um, what's her
Oh,
name?
Mrs. Hudson.
Mrs. Hudson,
Mhm.
for
Yes.
sure. That's it. But that's what I'm saying. If they're not a housekeeper or like a matron, he's out. He's like,
But
no, thank you.
if you had gone through what he did with Irene Adler,
Well,
you
that's what
probably
I'm
wouldn't trust
saying.
many either. So
Yeah.
read
Yeah.
A Scandal in Bohemia. You'll know what we're talking about.
Going
It's
on the
good one.
list.
But still, Sophie seems like cut right out of Holmes's depiction of women. She's already seen her brother beaten up by these guys and doesn't think that much of it, and then is surprised when he's killed by them,
Yeah.
and still wants
Like,
to marry one. And like,
Yeah.
she doesn't want to
okay.
be a spinster. Don't be ridiculous. To be fair, her other options are limited, and we saw some of them, and they were great. Those two ladies were having a
Sure.
great evening.
Oh, they
Yes, they
were
were.
with their rosy cheeks.
They
The
were real
rosiest
good.
of
Gotta look real healthy.
Yeah, makeup back
Not
then
gonna get work otherwise.
was something else. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
I'll just take this
Mhm.
lipstick and rub it on my cheeks too. That'll
Yeah,
make the
yeah.
men
Yep.
really think I'm something else.
Mm-hmm.
So the police take away Kemp. They take away Sophie, who, as Holmes puts it, after questioning, nothing will happen to her because there's nothing illegal about a cold heart. And then Mycroft is like, well, this business is dumb. I'm going back to the club. He just wants nothing else to do
I'm
with it.
exhausted.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been a very busy
And we
evening.
end with one of my favorite
it's
things,
8:30.
which is Holmes walking off into the mist. I do love that shot of him just disappearing off the train platform into the fog.
Yep.
And that
That is a very
ends
nice
the episode. The Greek interpreter. Again, it's not one of my favorite episodes of this series, but I thought it was a very good one as an introduction to Sherlock Holmes. You get to meet his brother. You get to meet. It's a fun mystery. There's a slight change from the original story, which is the bit at the end with the train. In the story, they just get away, and then what happens is they get away, and what Holmes reads in a newspaper several days later about the fact that Latimer and Kemp were found dead. And the implication is either that they turned on each other and killed each other, or that maybe Sophie exacted some revenge. It's left somewhat open-ended, but we don't get the resolution of like anyone getting caught. It's just they read that in the paper a few days later. They did change that up for a little more of a wrap up and kind of dramatic ending on the train, which I
Yeah.
think
them sitting
worked.
in the living room reading the newspaper is not like a
Yeah.
real boffo ending.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh boy.
it works. It works better in a visual medium the way that
Yeah,
they
yeah,
did.
yeah.
Right.
And I mentioned Jeremy Brett earlier as like being reluctant to take the role. One of the things that I found fascinating about him was he's so good as Sherlock Holmes, and yet he's always, I've seen him in several interviews say, well, the character is better read than it is seen. Like it's really a character to read much more than anything else. And one of the things he liked was doing this series. People were using that as a way to get people interested in the character and then read about him and read the stories. And he very much liked that. So yeah, it in a book form, in a short story like this was, I do think that the original ending does work.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work in a TV series. You need something, and their budget wasn't great, so it's not like they have a bunch of stunt work to do. So we just get guy hanging off a train, sort of loosely, and then he falls, which is a little cheese ball, but I'm fine with it. So that was the Greek interpreter. I want to know, what did you think, Audie? What did you think of that?
I dug it. This was good. It was really fun. I don't know if I'll go back and watch anymore, but I'm definitely open to it if it's on,
Mhm.
But I dug it. It was good. It was funny again, the Sherlock I know the most is the more recent Cumberbatch Freeman Sherlock. So that's what I was kind of comparing it to in my head. So seeing Mycroft the way he was just hilarious. And him and Sherlock bouncing off one another the entire episode was great. So this was a lot of fun.
Excellent. Stephen, how about you? What did you think of it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the episode. It was fun to watch the characters interact, like Audie said, and the villain just was awesome to me. I just really liked watching that dude. Like overall, though, I am not a good mystery TV watcher. I'm real bad at retaining information. And so, like, mysteries expect you to remember things that happened in the beginning, in the middle. And I'm much more just like scene for scene. Like, I've watched shows before and been like, I really love that show. And like, oh, what's it about? I have no idea. But the scenes that I'm watching are really good by themselves. Like, it's House of Cards was that way for me. I'm like, I don't know what's happening, but I'm really enjoying watching things happen. So,
Listen, I did when the first season of Only Murders in the Building,
yeah.
I had a notebook.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was
wow.
like in it, and then they just blew the whole thing up, and I was so mad for like 3 weeks. I had to have a cooling off period because I was like, this is the dumbest thing in the world. And then that and the fact that they expect you to believe that Martin Short spent $40,000 to launch their podcast. So
Mhm.
You got
yeah,
insider information there, though.
I
That was
was
you broke it
like,
yourself.
surely
Yeah.
not. Yeah, so don't, sometimes that's not a terrible thing. You can just
Yeah,
enjoy the story. It's cool.
exactly. So I
Yeah,
I
there's
didn't
nothing wrong with
understand like you going over the ending just now. I'm like, but there's what all happened? Like I'm still playing it back in my head trying to figure it out. That being said, I really liked watching it and it was fun, but don't ask me to explain what the mystery was or how it was solved. I don't have a flipping clue,
Yeah.
but I liked it a lot.
perfectly fair.
Yeah.
One of the great things about this series is that they're all self-contained stories because they
Mhm.
held so closely to the original stories that you can just watch any one of them. It doesn't matter. There's no through line. There's no real. There's very little serialized storytelling. There's a couple. Like there's a mention of Moriarty at the end of one episode, and then you see him in another one, and they do have the end of this run of 13 episodes ended with The Final Problem, which is the episode that, or the story that originally ended Sherlock Holmes. He died on Reichenbach Falls.
I just
Or did he?
realized that Steven is going to get to meet next generation Moriarty, and I am
Yes.
so excited for
Ooh.
that. And I totally forgot. And now I
Ooh.
am delighted.
Mhm.
It's so funny.
Yes.
Like I use that phrase all the time when I run across like somebody at work that's just giving me the runaround. I'm like, I think I've met my Moriarty. Like, I use that all the time. Those names, man, they're just so cool. They're just
hmm
ingrained. They're
Mhm.
almost words used to describe things. They're like, oh, is that a character in a book? I just always called my arch nemesis to Moriarty. It's kind of cool how it's worked its way into just our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amy, how about you? What did you think of this
This was
episode and this series?
fantastic. And now I now I'm all like itchy for more Holmes. Like I gotta go back. I gotta watch everything else. No, I'm back
If
in it.
if you want to know episodes of Jeremy Brett's run to watch, I can tell you plenty of them
Okay.
because I have watched
I
them
mean,
all.
I'm
I
gonna
love
just watch
all of
all
it,
of
but
them.
just watch them all. 'Cause
Just
they're all
watch 'em all.
good. I'll send you a link to the YouTube playlist so you just have
Sweet.
them. Yeah, I had a lot of fun going back to this because it's been a couple years since I've watched it. I went through the whole series a few years ago. I revisit it all the time, but I love just different incarnations, different iterations of Sherlock Holmes. But I
Mhm.
always do come back to this one at some point and watch some of it, just because Jeremy Brett, he's just amazing. But I'm glad that you all enjoyed it. It's really, really fun. And this is again that great kind of just background TV you can throw on too, or be Steven's goldfish brain with TV mysteries
Yeah.
and just
Yep.
just enjoy them in the moment. It is a very different style of television, that's for sure. Like it is deliberately paced,
Oh yeah.
and there's not a lot of music. There's a lot of scenes that have almost no, like very little sound,
Mhm.
except for what's going on in the room. But as long as you can adjust to that and that doesn't bother you, it's a lot of fun. It's stylistically like the polar opposite of the BBC Sherlock in a lot of ways. Like if you
Well,
watch that
yeah.
series, that is because it's modern, not
Right.
only
That is
from
totally modern.
not only from the setting, but also like the style and production
Mhm.
of it. Whereas this is very old
Mhm.
production. But I'm really glad you guys enjoyed this because this show is very near and dear to my heart. Um, so this was a lot of fun for me to get to revisit and get to talk to you about. So I had fun. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
We we got some feedback, by the way.
Yeah,
No
feedback.
email, but Skizix, who is often in our chat. First of all, before we get to the feedback, I should say next week we start a new round of episodes, and we finished our poll, and what won the poll was musicals.
Musicals. Or
So
music-oriented
something.
TV.
Mhm.
Yes. So we're going to be doing a month of that. That'll be fun.
I'm
And Skizix
excited.
wrote to the Twitter account, which is at Those Days Show. You can send us a DM or a reply there. Yay, musicals won the poll. I almost forgot that there was one more week of the current theme and was lamenting the irony of missing the first musical themed episode due to musical dress rehearsal for Hunchback of Notre Dame. I must confess that I have only watched the Benedict Cumberbatch, or as they said, Benedict Cucumber version of Sherlock Holmes,
Yes.
but always excited to learn about some of the classics. Well, hopefully we were able to give you something fun to talk about, and you can check that out. And we'll put the link for maybe the playlist in the show notes for
we
this
should
as
do.
well.
Yeah, we
So
should
you can
do
find that and watch that.
Put that in our little super secret group chat, and I'll put it in the notes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was Sherlock Holmes, and next week we're doing musicals. And who's starting us off? Audie's starting us off on musicals, isn't he?
Mhm. And musicals has been one that I've been trying to get us to do for a while now. So I'm happy we're finally doing this, because we're doing a show that's one that I grew up with, and one of those that I've wanted to do since we started this podcast. So we are going to watch Kids Incorporated.
Oh, snap.
Ooh,
Season
That's
2,
a
episode
name.
23, Material Girl. And I'm doing that one because it's on YouTube and it's been remastered and it's a real good quality. So
Oh,
it
wow.
won't break you to watch it.
Kids Incorporated.
Kids Incorporated, a name I have not heard.
I have not
long
heard
time.
that name.
I don't even know
Yeah.
if I know this
Sometime.
show.
Ooh, even better.
Yeah, this will be fun.
So, yes, this will be fun. So, buckle up, kids. We're going to watch some Kids Incorporated.
Oh, dang. There's some names on this show. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Let's
Yeah.
go.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into it for sure. But I'll give Steven the YouTube link for that too, and
Yeah.
have that in the show notes.
It'll
for
be
next
there.
week. So there you go.
Excellent. So next week, Kids Incorporated, as we start off musical month, musical March. All right.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
great. That's better than March Madness.
I mean, technically it'll be end of February into March, but I'm just going to call it musical March. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's March next week.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, it's March next week. We only have 29
that's
days
right.
in February.
I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. So musical March beginning next week with
Yeah.
Kids Incorporated. All right. See, I know what I'm doing. I know days.
We got this.
If you want to send us feedback, at Those Days Show on Twitter, any of the social medias, you can find me, TVsTravis. Steven's out there on some, Amy's on some, Danny Ora, Steve H&H. You got the Audie Norman. You can find us out there.
All those links are
you
in
can also email us.
show notes too. All that stuff goes in
Excellent.
the show notes. Yeah.
Good. And then you can also email us at thosewerethedayshow@gmail.com. We love your feedback. We love hearing from you. Thank you, Skizix, for writing in this week.
Yeah.
Super open to suggestions for topics and stuff.
Absolutely.
To put in the
Yeah.
notes.
Yes. Oh,
For sure.
absolutely. We want to hear from you.
We're ready to
absolutely.
We've been doing this for a
crowdsource
while
some of it.
now. We're getting tired.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
The well is running a little bit dry.
Yeah.
is what we're
Chat
trying to say.
GPT only has so many answers,
Yeah.
Come at us, normal humans.
So
Plus, the show's
until
for you, so if you
Yeah.
have a request and there's something you'd like to hear about, definitely let us
absolutely.
Yeah, we work
100%.
unpaid for you.
know. Mhm.
So until next week and our kickoff of musical March, for Amy, for Stephen, for Audie, I am Travis saying, have a good night. And it's elementary, my dear Watson.